related to organic matter and active carbon in the soil. So that's kind of the context. And there's many kinds of organic amendments that we can use to improve soil health and add more active carbon to the system. But in particular, how they are used can make a difference. In this comparison that I show in this slide of multiple orchard field trials from British Columbia, where the amendment was used as a surface mulch versus incorporated into the soil, the surface mulch led to a desirable tree outcome 2/3 of the time compared to 1/3 for the incorporated. So Jerry Nielsen kind of called it his batting average. And thus how you use it really makes a big difference. And so this kind of pushed us down the road of more surface mulch versus trying to incorporate materials into the soil. Plus we can do that after the trees are planted, whereas you can only do the incorporation before. Mulches can impact a number of aspects of the orchard ecosystem, including soil, water, nutrients, weeds, organisms, and microclimate. There's often an effect on trees, for example, increased growth, increased fruit yield, increased fruit size, lower leaf nitrogen. These effects depend on the type of mulch used and whether there are limiting factors in the orchard. Two sources of mulch at hand in an orchard are the alley vegetation, if that's how you're set up, and the tree prunings, and I'll talk about those. And I'll also say that everything I present here is a Central Washington context. So a lot of this would need some hard interpretation to a wetter environment, and there are some specific issues that we definitely would want to think about. I like to think about mulch in three different categories. There's the organic mulches, which are derived from plant or animal materials. They decompose over time. They sit on the soil surface where it's going to interact with the soil physically, chemically, and biologically. And that's a big difference. It has all three of those things going on typically. Eventually, it becomes incorporated into the soil. Part of it is lost back to the air as carbon dioxide. An inert mulch, like this weed fabric here on the right, plastic weed barrier. Some people use stone mulches. You may have heard of that. It sits on the surface as well, but mostly it has physical effects. That's the primary impact it's going to have in the orchard. And then finally, a living mulch down here at the bottom. It grows in the tree row and provides for more immediate biological and chemical impacts on the soil. Some good, some not, because there's competition, and that's a big aspect of the living mulches. I'll just talk about these two at this time. I'm going to mention briefly, because I've had this question, does the type of mulch, the type of tree it comes from matter? And the answer is, it appears to. There has been very little work done on this, but a fellow in the UK, Glenn Percival, did a test where he looked at mulches from 7 different species of trees, and he put them then on all combinations of the trees as receiving trees. And he found that 2 trees, the cherry and the hawthorn, as mulch sources, led to benefits on everything that received it. So that was a really interesting finding. He then played around with willow, and willow is known to have some plant active chemicals, the salicylic acid. He put willow chip mulch on an apple that was susceptible to scab, and he had right next to it a tree with no willow mulch. And the one with the willow mulch did show some resistance to scab that the other one did not. So apparently that willow mulch induced plant defense mechanisms in that tree, which is really interesting. And it just shows we don't know very much about all the potentials of the mulch. So that's a future area, I think, of a lot of interest. As far as impacting the soil, mulches definitely can do that. I talked in the talk I gave on this before about the active carbon being measured a couple different ways. Particulate soil carbon is one particular way to measure this very active young carbon in the system. And here are the 2 treatments. This is a whole range of treatments in the orchard. Alfalfa mow and blow, alfalfa in the alley and then cut and blown onto the tree row versus a bark mulch in the tree row. After 4 years, those 2 started to see an increase in this particular measure of soil carbon, of the active carbon. By 8 years, you can see how that bark had become incorporated in the soil and had a profound impact. So yes, the answer is we can definitely affect some of these soil indicators with mulches. In contrast, in a trial that I did, we had the wood chip mulch as well as the living mulches and some other treatments. After 2 years, the living mulches, which are the green here, we saw a significant increase in total carbon and particulate carbon, that active carbon, whereas the wood chip didn't show any change. So this really verified the idea that the roots of that living mulch can have a very quick effect on the soil, but in this case, they also competed with the trees. So yes, we can improve the soil, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're benefiting the tree the way that we want to. So we have to kind of keep that in mind. Of the organic mulches, there have been a lot of studies with wood chip mulch because it's tended to have the fewest problems. Frequently, there have been positive tree responses, and I'll give you an example of that. It is expensive. There's a lot of logistics involved, but from the studies that have been done, including one I did, we had a net positive outcome after paying for the mulch. It still was a positive economic benefit. So it makes sense to consider this as a positive possible practice. In a 3-year study I did on 2 different orchards, these were commercial orchards. One was on a poorer soil with apple, one on a very good soil with mature pear trees. And we saw a yield increase in both cases with the mulch compared to the standard treatment, better response, bigger response on the worst soil. And this is what you'll typically see. If you've got everything great and you put mulch on, you may not see a benefit because there's no limitation that you're overcoming. But most orchards have some limitation, and often the mulch is going to help address them. So that was the yield increase. Then over 3 years, this is how much we returned over the cost of the mulch to that grower per acre. $4,700 on the poor soil and $1,400 on the good soil. So again, there's an economic incentive there to think about mulch. We've also wondered whether mulch thickness is a factor. We've tended to put it on pretty thick because initially weed control was the focus, but because it's maybe not the best weed control, it can help, but you shouldn't rely on it. Maybe we can put on a lot less mulch and get some of the other benefits for a lot less money. So this shows effective mulch on soil temperature. This is 0, 1 inch of mulch, 2 inches, and 4. And you can kind of see that decreasing, declining return as we put on more and more mulch. So that first inch gave us a huge benefit. Maybe an inch or 2 is plenty. We don't need 4 or 6 inches. We need to do more work on that. Clearly, mulch can benefit moisture conservation. In this particular study, we actually had water meters out there. We measured the exact amount of irrigation water used over a couple growing seasons. And where we had the mulch, we used quite a bit less water than the bare ground treatment right next to it, 20 to 25% reduction. So that's pretty significant, particularly when we get water short years, or in a place like the west side where you don't have irrigation, but you get moisture stress in that mid to late summer. Mulch might get you through to get your crop off there before the water stress gets really bad. I'm going to skip that one. Temperature is an issue we wonder about here. It's probably not such a factor in Western Washington, but this just shows from a 1956 study looking at the effect of temperature on roots using these water baths of 44, 55, 66, or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And these are all different malling rootstocks compared to a seedling. And you can see that some of them, they just do not, they probably don't like the water bath for one, but here's malling 9. This is virtually what all of our orchards have been planted to up to the last few years, and they don't like the high temperatures. So is mulch moderating our hot temperatures here in Eastern Washington? And is that explaining some of the response when we put it on? I think the answer is probably, but again, we need some more definitive work. Here's an example of the trial where we had the different treatments, the bare ground, the wood chip mulch, 2 different kinds of living mulch. This was a living mulch with complete cover in the tree row. And here's a living mulch where we controlled competition on each side of it. It was a narrow strip, and then we tilled each side of it. This is called the sandwich system. It came out of Switzerland, and it was a way to try to moderate that competition effect. So in that study, what we found is that the wood chip mulch had the highest tree growth, the best fruit yield, and where we had the mulches, these 4 treatments were all these living mulches, where regardless of what was in there, it basically came out with a lower fruit yield in that first harvest year that we had. But where we controlled some of the competition, we got better tree growth than where we had the living mulch. in the whole tree row. And I think the message from all of this is you've got to be really careful with these living mulches, and it's probably not going to be a good idea until trees are 4, 5, 6 years old, till they're well established, and then let the tree kind of adapt to having that vegetation, which it will do over time. It will adjust. But right coming out of the gate, these young trees have a really hard time with the living mulch. There may be ways to use the living mulch as well. Perhaps we can put them in as an annual crop. And here, this is a winter annual, so it goes in when the trees are going dormant, really no competition, and it's dead pretty much by the next spring. Some possibilities there. I mentioned utilizing the resources in the orchard. And this partly was thinking about, the logistics of hauling those wood chips in is not trivial. It's a big deal. And not, there's not enough to go around either. So what can we do with the resources in the orchard to get some of this positive mulch effect? And one was to use what we call mow and blow. And that's simply using the vegetation we plant in the alley, cutting it and putting it on the tree row. Pretty simple. In this case, the growers simply let the grass grow longer. They didn't do anything different there. And they got their mower adapted to do this side delivery. So instead of just chopping it and dropping it, it blows it out the side. And you can see how this beautiful mulch layer is being put down on the tree row. And simply by doing that, the grower, of course, had reduced passes with the mower. They reduced their weed spray because this was helping. It wasn't 100%, but it definitely suppressed weeds. They reduced irrigation. There was that water conservation. And so all that saved the grower money right out of the gate. Plus, they're getting that active carbon. They're really benefiting the soil right where the tree roots are. And typically this is bare ground, which is the worst ecological setting for biology and roots. So that was a big incentive for them to try it. We wanted to understand, was there a measurable benefit to the trees? So in another block with that same grower, put out a trial where we simply had them do their mow and blow, but then I removed the mulch from one set of plots. That became the 0 mulch, and I dumped it on another. That became the 2X. So we had a bit of a rate of 0, 1, and 2X of this mow and blow. And after 2 years, we saw a 20% increase in tree growth with that 2X rate. That was statistically significant. So yes, we can measure a benefit to the trees in a young orchard like this from mow and blow. Even though it doesn't look like much, it's having an effect. It's also adding nutrients, something that we need to be careful of because definitely we're moving nutrients around. But we've got some people that have also planted legumes in the alley for nitrogen. And definitely by putting that on the tree row, you are adding a significant portion of your fertility through that mow and blow system. Some people are growing much higher biomass crops in the alley to the point where the normal rotary mower can't even handle it. And so this grower down in the Dalles in his cherry orchard planted this mix of cover crops and he wanted to mow and blow it. He actually bought a side delivery flail mower that could handle this material, no problem. Came out of Italy. It was designed for orchards over there. And it cut that material and blew it out and laid down this row of mulch. It wasn't as even as I would like, but it was a start. And so equipment options are becoming more and more possible as well. Some commercial growers have gone to buy the what they call the 0-turn turf mowers. It's the lawn mower with the cutting in front, and they found that they can go twice as fast as a tractor and mower with those, and basically pay for the machinery on a larger orchard pretty quickly just by reduced operator time. And those can do mow and blow as well. So a lot of innovation that people are looking at. So the second source of material in an orchard, at least in our commercial orchards, is going to be the prunings. Historically, people would prune their trees. A lot of times they'd rake it up, they'd haul it out, and they burn it. That's all wonderful carbon just going to waste. But now the typical practice would be to do your pruning. You come through with a brush rake and they would pull out all that material, the twigs and everything, into the center of the drive alley. And then they'd drive over it with a flail mower would chop it up and basically make chips. And then they'd leave it there. No real benefit to the orchard system because it's essentially smothering the grass. That's about all it's doing. So this grower said, well, what if we move that material to the tree row? And I said, that would be fantastic. How we're going to do that? They took their brush rake, they reversed the belt, and this became like a reverse sweeper. So here's the flailed prunings in February. Here they're coming through with their brush rake. Oops, let's see if I can get it to work. Here's where they've swept it. So you can see all this material is gone from the center and it's now on the tree row. And there it is on the tree row, a nice layer of wood chip mulch. And it lasted well through the season. They figured at a cost of $5 an acre. So that's a heck of a lot better than having to haul wood chips in on a truck and get a spreader. So simple practices like this can really make a difference. And so my advice is, where you can, depending on your orchard scale and your equipment, use your grass clippings and use your prunings. And this is an example from an orchard that did that. They combined those two. You get the benefit of the green material, that's the real readily decomposable material from the grass, and the brown or the woody material, harder to decompose. Those are put together, and essentially you've got a compost pile right in your tree row, right where your tree roots are, right where you're stimulating the biology the most. Really wonderful way to go. In this photo, you can see that combo. You can kind of see the woody material from their prunings recycling. On top of it, now they've been dumping the mow and blow during the growing season. And this orchard was literally established on a decommissioned gravel quarry. So they started this orchard with zero soil, zero. And over time, they were bringing organic amendments in, compost and various things. They got the orchard to survive, and then it started to thrive. And then they started mow and blow, and then they started the prunings. And once they got those going, they stopped all their compost purchases and they reduced their fertilizer rates. This is a really high producing orchard, and it's quite a testimony to the power of these organic amendments used as a surface mulch to improve soil, tree growth, and fruit yield. And this is something that most of our growers could do. And that's why we're trying to promote the idea. So that's the end of that talk, and I'd be happy to take any more questions.